morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the 15th edition of the United Potato Growers Potato Business Summit. And even though we would love to be seeing you all in person, this virtual experience will still deliver the quality industry overview that everyone has come to expect. This event is co-sponsored by United Potato Growers of Canada, the Potato Marketing Association of North America, and the United Potato Growers of America. I am honored to present Kevin McIsaac, the General Manager of United Potato Growers of Canada, and Dale Latham, President of the Potato Marketing Association of North America.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin McIsaac, and I'm the General Manager of the United Potato Growers of Canada. On behalf of our Chairman, Ray Keenan, and the Board of Directors of UPGC, I would like to welcome you to the 2021 Potato Business Summit. Now, each January, attending this Potato Business Summit has been one of the highlights of our year. But unfortunately, as you all know, due to COVID-19, this summit must be a virtual one. When we think back how much has changed since we last attended this event 1 year ago. Even with all of the supply and demand calculations that we would do, the modeling and the projections, none of the brightest minds in the world could have prepared us for the changes in our potato markets since last March. The pandemic has certainly taught us the value of communicating among the three major supporters of this summit in helping the sectors of table, process, seed, and chips react to changes in the marketplace. One positive outcome from COVID has been the support and willingness of consumers to understand the importance of locally grown food on their grocery shelves. This year in Canada, our production was down for potatoes, mostly due to a hot, dry weather summer and fall that we've had. However, the harvest went very well, and we left very few abandoned acres in comparison to the last couple of years. We now look forward to marketing the crop. So in conclusion, we have two wishes for you today. One is that you enjoy the presentations following. Secondly, and even more importantly, is that our countries can get back to somewhat of a near normal way of living and doing business together when this pandemic is over. Enjoy your day. Thank you again for joining us.
Good morning. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Dale Latham, and I am the Executive Director of the Potato Growers of Washington and the President of the Potato Marketing Association of North America. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this year's virtual Potato Business Summit. One question that I am often asked is who or what is the Potato Marketing Association of North America? PMANA is an association that is made up of all of the bargaining groups that negotiate potato contracts with the major frozen potato processors in the 12 states and provinces that they operate throughout North America. We are an information sharing group that strives to educate our growers on the current market situations for potatoes and potato products. Our goal is to give each organization the most current information possible so that they can then use that information to reach the best contract terms and conditions for their member growers. PMANA also has worked closely with both the United Potato Growers of America and the United Potato Growers of Canada. The three organizations have collaborated on each of the previous business summits and share the United Potato Partners program, which helps connect our partners with key growers in each growing region. Currently, our partners are AMVAC and Vive. Every crop year in the potato industry is a challenge. 2020 has raised that challenge bar to a new high, not only for our growers, but our processors, their customers, and consumers. Therefore, I believe that the information you are about to hear will be even more important than ever as we navigate through this pandemic and begin to establish a new normal. On behalf of all of the organizations of the Potato Marketing Association of North America and their member growers, welcome to the 2021 Potato Business Summit.
I would also like to extend a very special recognition to our generous corporate sponsors, our United Potato Partners, AMVAC and Vive Crop Protection, John Deere Company, and the J.R. Simplot Company. Eric Wintemute of AMVAC and Dan Billmeyer of Vive will now share a few words with us.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Wintemute, and I am President and CEO of AMVAC. We've been pleased to be a sponsor of the Potato Business Summit since its beginning 15 years ago. Like the rest of you, I wish this was in person, but we have all learned to adapt over these last 9 months. The pandemic has had an effect on all of us, and the potato industry is certainly no exception. Idaho seems to be hit the hardest, but currently things appear to be moving in the right direction. I want you to know that we at AMVAC are doing our part to maintain the availability of our product lines, both through production and logistics, and to meet all the regulatory hurdles required to maintain our registrations. This includes maintaining existing or obtaining new MRLs so that you can export your crops to countries such as Japan, Mexico, and Canada. 2 years ago, we at AMVAC celebrated our 50th anniversary. So this year makes 52, which means we are now playing with a full deck. Our business model has been to acquire mature brand name products from the major basics and ensure their continued viability to growers such as yourself. More recently, we have established growth initiatives into the biological space through acquisitions and basic R&D research. We expect that many of these products will be very beneficial to potato growers. In addition, this year we are launching a project that has taken us 12 years to perfect, our SIMPAS technology. SIMPAS gives growers the ability to prescriptively apply multiple products at variable rates in the field. Last year, we successfully beta tested SIMPAS with the 4 largest distributors in the United States, along with Corteva, and we are very excited to bring this development to the agricultural industry. If you Google SIMPAS, you will see a wide variety of literature and videos that will give you a better understanding. Finally, I would like to express my thanks to UPGA and PMANA for all the work that you do for this vital industry. I wish everyone a great conference, and I'm looking forward to all of us being together in person next year. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Dan Billmeyer, VP of Sales and Marketing with Vive Crop Protection, and I'm happy to be here today and welcome you to the 2021 Potato Congress. Vive is glad to be a United Potato Grower partner and working directly with potato growers through UPGA and the Potato Marketing Association of North America. We are proud to bring partners products to potato growers that make a real difference on the farm. Our products provide excellent control and higher yields, as well as saving time, fuel, water, labor, and frustrations in your farming operation. By using Vive's patented allosperse delivery system, Vive's products enable universal tank mixing, highly flexible application times, including the ability to use through chemigation, regardless of other chemistry that might be applied simultaneously on your potato crop. So really a unique value for you as an operator. This winter, each of you will receive an invitation for a one-on-one meeting with a Vive representative to answer questions and be trained on Vive's technology and learn more about our entire Vive product line. Please also plan to attend our breakout session held on January 6th at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Time, 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The title of that session is called The Future of High Yield and Quality, Precision Chemistry and Fertility Advancements. There you'll have the ability to hear from natures on why in-row fertility makes sense, as well as how Vive products fit in a grower that has used both fertility on the seed and Vive products. So really some firsthand knowledge and experience with Vive products in potatoes. Please also plan to visit the Vive booth at the virtual trade show and enter to win 120 acres worth of Vive product of your choice. We really appreciate the partnership with UPGA and the Potato Marketing Association of North America. And we thank you again for the opportunity to be partner with you and to enhance your productivity and yields. Hope you have a wonderful conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric and Dan. This 2021 Potato Business Summit will give us an extensive overview of the global potato industry and will bring together experts in their fields to educate us on current conditions and on future trends. As always, The following disclosure will establish our legal guidelines. This is a public conference for the education and benefit of those involved in the potato industry. It is not a meeting of any of the 7 sponsors, i.e. United Potato Growers of America, United Potato Growers of Canada, Potato Marketing Association of North America, AMVAC, Vive Crop Protection, John Deere, or the J.R. Simplot Company. The antitrust laws of the United States prohibit certain actions such as price fixing, supply management, allocation of products or customers, and other similar activities, unless they are conducted inside a Capper-Volstead cooperative or similar association. Since this is not an official meeting of the United Potato Growers of America, no immunity from antitrust laws exists. Therefore, none of the foregoing subjects will be discussed in this conference. All right, we will now start with the first presentation, and be sure to check out the presenters' bios at potatobusinesssummit.com. First up, we are again very pleased to have Stephen Nicholson of Rabobank to give us an economic outlook for the ag market. Stephen?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Nicholson, Senior Grains and Oilseed Analyst at Rabo AgriFinance in St. Louis, and welcome to the virtual Potato Business Summit. I'm coming to you virtually as well this year, and I wish we were all together, but for all of our safety and our health, this is the right decision. And so I hope that we're all back together next year and we can visit face to face, because it's a much more enjoyable experience for you and for me as a speaker. So let's dive in, and we're gonna start like we always do and talk about the macro outlook. If we'd had this discussion just a mere 2 or 3 months ago, it would have been a much different discussion. And now, just in the last 2 or 3 months, everything's changed and there is so much going on. We could talk for a couple hours about this day, but I won't do that, I promise you. But we'll do it and start going through the process. So first is China. Obviously, everyone's wondering about China, what's happening. So let's give a couple facts, first of all. So through October of this year, and that's the latest data we have as we video this for the Potato Business Summit, they have met 38% of their phase 1 trade agreement commitments. So that's a ways off. They're not going to meet the commitment, and I think there's no question about that. But I think the other question is, though, they have really upped their game just in the last several months. And so when you look at this slide, you're going to see in 2021 a huge increase in soybean exports, a big increase in corn exports, and you'll see a little bit uptick both in sorghum and in wheat exports. And so I think we have to think about China at this point in a little longer lens than just the phase 1 trade agreement. China needs a lot of stuff. They just need a lot of stuff. And so they're rebuilding stocks, they're rebuilding hog herds, so the demand for feed is huge. And so this is a multi-year event. And so I think when we look at it from the total view of our commodity markets and what this means to us, I think it's very positive. And as I said, this is a 2 or 3 year event, and this is not a flash in the pan. They're here today and gone tomorrow. So I think that's the thing we have to think about and have to remember and keep in mind as we look forward to what's happening across China and across our markets. But we have to also step back a minute and think about the global economy. And so we always talk about the GDP, and the GDP is vital to both the economies growing and agricultural and food demand growing as well. So we did see, and you'll notice this, the huge dip in 2020 because of COVID, and we do see it rebounding. It is rebounding fairly closely to where we left off, if you have it, back in March of 2020. And so we see the economies, coming back. We expect that, and that is good for all of us, both economically, but also from a food perspective. But there's a lot right on the on the vaccine, and the vaccine's helpful. If the vaccine is good and everything goes as planned, and as we see here in early vaccinations, then we should be in pretty good shape. Now we look at the United States, same situation, very volatile GDP. We saw the big dip in March. We saw it come back here in the third quarter. And the question is, does it kind of drop into where we have been typically? And I think there's when we look at expectations for 2021, we're expecting GDP to kind of be in that you see a lot of 2 to 3% area. There are a few people who are in the 4% area, but the fact is the economy will come back. It'll be a little volatile as we get there, but it will come back, and we'll see people back, buying stuff again, whether it's durable goods, whether it's, food, whether it's, clothing and things like that. But it's going to take a while because people have changed a lot of habits. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go forward. But I think a couple, and I'm able to talk about right now, one of the things I will talk about is disposable personal income. And this certainly, when you see this chart, you'll see this big spike in disposable personal income. And with that personal income going up, you did see a good buy of food, a lot of that in the grocery stores. We saw that in the whole meats group. Consumers continue to buy food, buy a little better food because they weren't going out to restaurants. And so we saw, that really helped. People talk about government spending and the stimulus it causes, and it absolutely happened. And you look at disposable income, and it's a major driver of food demand. And so it's going to come down, and so we'll see a little bit of that food demand come back a little bit. But I think there's a couple of things we have to worry about and think about. One is when we think about the household's no longer going out to eat. They're eating at home. They're cooking at home. They're baking at home as a family together. And so I think that's going to stick. The consumer has enjoyed that because they've seen what that's done to their pocketbook. It's increased their pocketbook and their disposable income for other purposes, whether it's debt retirement or buying other things. The other piece we have to think about, and this is particularly concerning when we think about it from a potato perspective, is all the restaurants that close. As we stand here today taping this, the National Restaurant Association is saying about 110,000 restaurants have closed in the United States. And I think there's someplace around 650,000 in the United States. So you've seen a huge drop off in restaurants. So, from a potato standpoint, we worry about those fresh potatoes being on the plates in steakhouses, for example. Frozen potatoes have been doing well at the grocery store, and we do see fresh potatoes at the grocery store as well. But you've lost that one channel, and so we have to think about that in the broader picture. And that's going to be a while before that comes back, or if it even does come back to the level it was before coronavirus. So something to think about going forward. We always get questions when we talk and we're going to move away from some of the economics to talk about interest rates. The Fed has been very careful and very, very certain about saying we're going to have low interest rates for the next 2 to 3 years. And we take their word for that. So from a standpoint of financing, I don't see any major issues there that we have to be concerned about as we move forward. We always get the questions now about the dollar. And we've seen the dollar really come off the highs that it had earlier in 2020 and has come quite a ways down. Now, we do look at the index, and as we talk about every year, is the index has come down, so that's good for exports. And the quick answer to that is yes, but as we always say, we have to look at our competitors. Now, the same thing has happened to them. Their currencies, think about the real, the peso, and the ruble, have also depreciated against the dollar. So they're going to be very competitive in the world that we have to compete against. And you think about, particularly when you think about Russia and you think about Europe, as potato places that are selling potatoes, they're going to be very competitive with our exports. The same way when we think about our exports of corn, wheat, and soybeans and sorghum, we again have to compete with those other countries, and their currencies come down as well. So we have to put this in context, and I think that's the concern, is that yes, the dollar is depreciated, but so has the other currencies. And as long as the interest rates are very low, that will keep the dollar at a fairly low rate, a low level, because there's no incentive to invest in the dollar, because they're not getting any more value from the dollar from an interest rate perspective than they would any other currency in the world. So we have to keep that in mind. The good news is the dollar has come down. The bad news, so is our competitors, and we have to keep that in perspective. I do want to spend a little bit talking about a couple things, thinking about agriculture in a post-COVID world. And I'm just going to give you some headlines and some just quick notes around that. We, as a group globally, came together this summer, or last fall, I should say, and came together and said, what are some of the major trends we see in a post-COVID world for the grain and oilseed sector? Some of these apply to other sectors, but I think there's some things we have to talk about. We did talk about consumer behavior and how they've changed. Think about, too, they're coming back to comfort food. Potatoes being a comfort food. And we do a lot more baked potatoes at home now because it's easy, it's convenient, and it's a quick meal. So the consumer, I think, as we talked just a minute ago, is changing their behavior. Also going back to good old brands, comfort brands, going back to the middle of the grocery store. They're not just spending their time in the produce, the fruit, the deli, the meat case, the dairy case. They're going back in the middle of the store and pick up packaged goods. And that's obviously where instant potatoes are and things like that. Also increased government intervention. And this kind of starts to boil into several other trends. Obviously, the governments are becoming more involved in agriculture, whether it's climate change whether it's in financial support for agriculture because of what's happened because of COVID, and also when we talk about trade. And that was another issue that we identified very quickly, was the acceleration of trade, of dynamics around deglobalization of supply chains. We see in the world countries going kind of two different directions. There is we're going to go the bilateral agreement. We're going to pull out of multilateral agreements like we pulled out of TPP, and we're making agreements with countries one-on-one. But you have also these trade agreements. There's like a 15-country agreement that was just recently signed in Asia with China and several other countries in the Southeast Asia Pacific Rim area. So you kind of have this bifurcation of trade agreements. You also have the issue of local food and regional food, and that gets into food security and food safety as the consumer becomes more concerned about that. So maybe I want more food that's local, regional. Trade doesn't become a big issue though, because it's all regional or it's bilateral. The other thing I should say about the bilateral, just to back up for a minute, it does complicate the whole world. Rules are different. Everyone has different rules now. There's not the trade pact and says, oh, these are the rules, we get to all follow these. Now it's just more complex and becomes more expensive. But I mentioned food security. Countries are worried if another pandemic could come along or another outbreak of some disease. They don't want to be caught and be waiting for supply to get to them because there's some sort of hang-up. And so we see, and you've heard this, I'm sure, of the fact is it's not just in time anymore, it's just in case. People are building inventories. That's one of the reasons China is buying a lot, because they're building inventories to be ready for that particular other shoe to drop if you have it. So it's something to watch as we go forward. One of the last thing just to talk about is digital supply chains. One of the things, and we talked about this with food security and food safety, is that traceability has become a bigger issue for consumers and for companies. How do we trace the food that we put in that package, or where did that potato come from? We know in the potato business, there's a lot more traceability of where that potato came from. But for a lot of foods, that's not true. And so we have to find a way to do that. And digitization of the supply chain is one of those things that's happening. We see that happening also when we look at farm inputs. And people now are starting to think about, do we Amazon for farm inputs? You go and you buy your farm inputs, and that comes from a big distribution center rather from your local agronomy store. So lots of things changing, lots of things happening going forward that we have to think about in a post-COVID world. And one of the last things we want to talk about from a macro perspective is kind of the election. First of all, I think as we well know, former Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack is coming back. So we know we have a known commodity there. We know he will get confirmed by the Senate and will move forward, but we do know some of that. And so that's a little bit of comfort, I think, knowing that we don't have someone in there we don't know. But at the same time, we talk about trade in the new Biden administration. Don't think there'll be much change of the trade policy toward China. Doesn't mean the tone won't change, because the tone is going to change. And I kind of like to talk about the president-elect Biden at this point is more of iron fist and a velvet glove. He's going to build a coalition of countries that come together and try to pressure China more than they have been before. He has said he doesn't plan to be removing tariffs immediately. I think there's a little disappointment in ag country about that, but I think we have to wait and see how that plays out. He's got other things on his first 100-day agenda, and probably removing those tariffs are not the first. He kind of gets the lay of the land and figure out who is kind of in the coalition and who's not before he makes a big move. But I think this coalition will be focused on trade. It'll be focused on technology transfer. It'll be focused on military expansion by China. So a lot of things happening around China. So I think that something to pay attention to, and hopefully agriculture. I think there's a lot more sensitivity about agriculture getting caught in the middle of this before. In the campaign, the incoming Biden administration talked about more money for rural development. Doesn't necessarily mean more money for farm payments, and I don't believe that's true, but it will be more of a focus on rural development, jobs in rural America, infrastructure in rural America, also broadband access. We know, and as you know very well, there are parts of the country that just have horrible access to the broadband, and that's really needed, particularly as we go more digital and we have more things that are connected to the internet around the world that we need to do. So the other thing is biofuels and climate change. I think this is a really worrying area for agriculture. One is President-elect Biden talked about support for biofuels, the RFS and ethanol, and he's very, very clear about that. But at the same time, he's talked about wanting to support climate change initiatives and be a big supporter of that. they're going to have to reconcile those two things in the sense of you have kind of old school biofuel, which is, petroleum based internal combustion engines, with climate change, which wants to change the way we drive and all those things around that. So that will have to be reconciled within the Democratic Party and within the administration, between all the factions there. I think the other thing about climate change that I know that worries agriculture, and I think is something we have to be very vocal on and very, very engaged with, is how does this translate into a regulatory structure for agriculture, and particularly production agriculture. I know that's a worry, and I think that's something we need to be a part of the conversation and not just fight it. We have to be part of that conversation and make sure that we get people hear what we need, and we can come to an agreement on that. A couple of the quick things is rigorous enforcement of antitrust laws. President-elect Biden has been very concerned about competitive pricing, both for farmers' inputs and also for their markets. And so I think you'll see a little more rigorous enforcement of those laws and making sure that markets stay competitive. And finally, just kind of on a bit of a nostalgic note, is that we've lost a lot of longtime voices for agriculture in Congress in this election cycle. Colin Peterson, the House Ag Committee Chairman, was defeated. Pat Roberts, the senator from Kansas, is retiring. You also are losing Mike Conway from Texas. And I think if you look at those three alone, I think there's 85 years of experience in agricultural legislation. So a lot of those voices are lost, and we have a lot of new voices. And so I think a lot of the conversation may be not necessarily what we would call traditional ag policy, maybe focus more around health and nutrition and hunger. And so I think we have to think about that and make sure that we're aware of that and be careful of that. So a lot of things changing on that policy front as well. One thing I do want to mention, and we talked a little bit about it when we talk about policy side, is we have to be worried about farm payments going forward. If you look at what's happened in the last 3 years between MFP, CFAP, and the PPP program, we've had an explosion of payments to farmers. And when you think about that, and you'll see this chart, is that a third of net cash income came from the government in 2020. In 2021, that's going to go away. And so it'll be back to traditional farm programs like ARC, PLC, conservation and our conservation programs, and also crop insurance. So we have to be aware of that. Good news is that the markets have come up and are going to be more supportive of our income, but we probably will not have the infusion of cash that we've had over the last 3 years from 2018 until 20. So just one thing we have to think about and keep in mind. I think this year that number that we gained was almost $32 to $35 billion that was influxed up and above traditional farm programs here because of CFAP, PPP, and MFP programs. So let's talk just a second here about acreage, and we look at going forward. And this is a good transition as we talk a little bit about markets. When we look at acres going forward, we talked about all the stuff, if you have it, that China's coming. So they want corn, they need soybeans, they need some wheat, they need sorghum. They're importing cotton right now. So there's going to be and you know what's happened to prices have come up. So there's going to be a huge fight for acres this year. I'll just give you some round numbers of what we're thinking on the big three, so to speak, or the big four if we talk about cotton. So corn, we think will probably add 1 to 2 million more acres of corn this year. We're going to see the biggest increase when we talk about beans. We're talking close words probably of 6 to 7 million acres of beans, closer to 88 to 90 million acres of beans. So now you've got, say, 180, give or take a couple million acres away of just those two crops alone. Wheat acres probably come back to 45 million acres, a little increase there as well. The demand has been good as the prices have been better than we've seen the last several years. But you also have cotton prices have come up quite a bit. And cotton acres are going to be someplace probably in that 12.5 million. So you have a huge increase of acres this year. And so we expect that to happen. Just a comment quickly about potato acres. As you all know, potato acres, better than I do, potato acres have been coming down over the last several years. And actually it's actually been almost a decade long, decrease in potato acres trending down. And we see a concentration of those acres in in more major states. We think about Idaho, we think about Washington, we think about North Dakota. We see more concentration of those acres. And so one thing that makes me worried and think about a little bit is with acres concentrated in more of those particular acres, then if something goes wrong in those states, then you have, like we had 2 years ago, then we have more issues to think about, and that's good for prices, but it does cause a lot of concern about quality, concern about availability of potatoes and the type of potatoes. So I think that's something to think as we go forward. Just to give you a contrast, and to finish this up, if you look at 2020, the 6 states in this slide came to 76% of the total potato acres in the United States. Just a mere 4 years ago, those 6 states only equaled about 69%. So a huge swing in the concentration of acres. I will tell you, most of those acres have come out of other states than those 6. So keep that in mind as we go forward, that it is around particular acres in particular states. Okay, we finished talking about the macro side. So let's dive in just a few minutes we have left, talking about specific commodities. And we're going to focus on wheat, corn, and soybeans. And we'll just give you some kind of headlines and things to be thinking about. And we'll spend the most time on wheat because that's one of the biggest rotational crops with potatoes, obviously. So when we look at the wheat chart, I'm going to pull up the bulls and bears and kind of talk about the headlines in that market and what I see as the possibilities. The biggest news, of course, in wheat, of course, is the weather. This is a La Nina year, and it is impacting wheat crops all over the world. Maybe the one not being impacted, or the one being impacted the least, is Australia. But you look at Argentina, you look at the southern plains of the United States, you look at the Black Sea area, and you look at Russia, all have questions about production of wheat and what's going to happen. And with that hanging over the market, that is going to help support wheat. When you look at U.S. winter wheat conditions going into dormancy, they were at the lowest level since 2013. Now, I have to just parenthetically say, just because they're low now doesn't mean they'll be low in the spring when we come out of dormancy. Remember that, as we all know, wheat's a grass and is very resilient. But the fact is we did not go into dormancy well, and so we need some moisture and we need a good spring to come out. So those are things I think to think about. The couple other things are, of course, is if those things happen, that's good for U.S. exports. The other thing that's happening is Russia. Just as we've taping this here today, Russia announced that they're going to formally impose an export tax on a number of their commodities, wheat being one of them, and also an export quota, which will go into effect in February of this year. And so that will also allow that there'll be other spots in the world that need wheat that will come to the United States or to Australia or Canada to get their needs. So, overall, I would say the wheat situation of the United States is at least at the worst stable and a little bit friendly going forward. And so I think we have to think about that and look at the wheat prices. And again, when we see that opportunity, let's take those advantages and lock in some profits going forward. One last thing on wheat, the one thing that's happening, and because the exports are so strong, whether from wherever, whether it's Asia or China, is the fact is we have U.S. wheat stocks going down and we have world wheat stocks going up. So that will be a temper on prices getting too high. But the fact is we have good prices, and as we just discussed, it's an opportunity to lock in some profits. So let's talk about the corn market just a little bit. I think that's one of the other areas that's been a bright spot. And when we look at corn and we look at the bulls and bears in corn, it's all about China. It has nothing to do with our crop that happened this year that was a little bit down because of both drought and derecho across the Corn Belt, and also because of the ethanol sector being down. But the fact is global exports are strong, and the U.S. is benefiting that because China has been the big taker of that. The other thing that's helping the corn market, particularly here in the U.S., is the fact of Brazil. Brazil got their soybean crop in late, and we'll talk about that in soybeans, but that means that their second crop or their safrinha crop of corn will be late, which means it'll be a smaller crop. We won't yield as well and won't have the perfect opportunity. So that also opens up a longer window for U.S. exports as we get into the summer. Instead of being kind of shut off come June, now we're going to get into June, into July, because that safrinha crop may not be late, will be late in being harvested. So there are some good opportunities there. Looking forward as to what's happened with corn. As we finish up with beans, and this is really where the explosion is going to happen potentially, that's where, as you saw in the chart earlier with bean exports to China are huge. They're not record, but they are certainly a record from what we've had the last couple of years. And what's happening in the U.S. when you look at the S&D for beans is we're now under 200 million bushel carryout, and we're now getting closer to 100 million bushel carryout on beans. And that means potential explosive prices on soybeans going forward. That's why you're going to see the big increase in soybean acres in 2021 because of demand. The other thing is domestic crush is good. It's very strong. Both, and really the darling has been soybean oil. The demand for soybean oil globally, because palm oil has been so high, has been tremendous. So with that, I'm going to finish. Hopefully we get a chance to talk next year and we can talk about what the markets are doing and have a face-to-face conversation. So thank you for listening, and thank you for attending the Virtual Potato Business Summit here in 2021.
Thank you, Stephen. Excellent information as always. Next up, we are very glad to have with us again Cedric Porter of World Potato Markets to give us a European potato update.
Well, hi everybody, and I'm Cedric Porter. I'm the editor of World Potato Markets, and I'm going to give you a European market outlook for the Potato Business Summit. World Potato Markets is a weekly briefing on potato and potato product trade, production and price and information, and we have some very loyal readers in North America, so many thanks for that. And yeah, like everyone, I wish I was in Texas this year, and I thought I'd find the nearest place to Texas for me. And this is a diner in my local hometown of Tunbridge Wells in Kent in England. And yeah, a Texan diner, Smith & Weston. But like lots of diners, restaurants, pubs, all closed across England, across the whole of the UK, and across large parts of Europe as well, because of the pandemic. And of course, coronavirus, that continues to overshadow the whole of the world market, and will probably do for many months to come, despite now having the vaccine and the vaccines actually being administered across the world. And hopefully that does give us some light at the end of the tunnel. So what's happened in 2020? The pandemic sort of hit just at a time when European growers were planting their potatoes, and there was actually a slight increase in the amount of potatoes grown as people partly responded to an increase in retail fresh potato demand, and also I think because they already had the potatoes booked and on the farm, they planted them anyway. So that actually meant a slight increase in the amount of potatoes planted in both the EU as a whole, the 28 countries, which for these purposes includes the UK, and also in the total EU 5, which is Belgium, France, Netherlands, Germany, and UK. There was a slight increase in there. So more potatoes around, which did have a big effect on the market. And there we see what these are latest prices, December prices. So the columns there are contract prices, and the line below are free buy prices, free market prices for Belgian potatoes, for Belgian processing potatoes. And so there you can see a big difference. So more than $100 a ton difference between the free buy and the contract price. Not much really prospect of those prices going up until much later on in the season. These are figures here on how much potatoes have been processed and how much potatoes have been used. So the left-hand one, that's Dutch, that's Netherlands processing. So you can see that blue line, the 2020 line, a massive decrease in April, May time, at the height of the first part of the pandemic, when there was production really, in a lot of places almost ceased, and that left a lot of potatoes on the market. Some of those were taken off in schemes, with government-backed schemes taking those off the market. So well over 1 million tons of potatoes got taken off the markets in Belgium, Netherlands, and France. The figures on the right, that's Belgian figures on usage. This is up until the middle of November. So you can see there the 2020 figure, the second on the right there. That's down, not dramatically down a little bit on the 10-year average. But still some processing going on, and probably around about sort of 90% of previous levels. And that's what we're seeing at the moment. There has been increased table potato retail demand, and I know that's happened in North America as well, and with people growing or eating a lot more potatoes at home as they feed their families, as they don't go out so much. And that's really a trend that we've seen in Europe as well. So there, the left-hand figures there, that's France. So you can see a big increase. That's nearly a third increase in French potato consumption at the beginning of the pandemic. But that increase is actually being maintained all the way through. And we've seen that at the end of the year 2020, when places have been locked down. There's still been a very strong demand for potatoes at home. The German figures on the right there, a little bit more difficult to interpret, but actually you see there the right-hand column in each of those clusters. That's consumption in 2020. So each year, each month since actually since February time, there's been more consumption of potatoes just about every month there. In the UK, the AHDB in the UK, the body that looks after potatoes and promotes potatoes there, saying an 8% increase in potato usage in the 9 months to the end of September, with a 14% increase in home use actually outweighing a 28% decrease in out-of-home sales. So that sort of balanced that out there, but still very disruptive on the restaurant trade. There have been some recoveries in fry exports. These are the main 5 exporting countries in Europe, Belgium, Netherlands, France, Germany, and Poland. And you can see they have a very big decrease in April and May, and then a sort of recovery, a little bit of a stalled recovery in September, expecting more in October, but then perhaps less fries in November and December exported because of the ongoing pandemic and the closure of restaurants, particularly in Europe. A crucial one here, this is EU exports outside the EU. And actually, that back line there, they're October figures. So you can see that actually October 2020, there were more, I think it was the 3rd largest monthly exports of fries from the EU ever. And the only reason it was down on October 2019 was because October 29 was the highest figure ever. So a sort of recovery in exports outside the EU, and I suppose that sort of shows that the EU market is still very damaged, but there has been recovery in other markets, and there has been a strong export campaign to export more fries as well from the EU. Here's figures. This one is showing exports to the USA from the EU, and you can see there's been quite a big jump there. Well, actually, in the January to October timeframe, a 55% increase in exports from the EU to the US of frozen fries. So that's a big jump there. A 43% increase to Canada, but we're not talking such a large tonnage. So it may be around getting on for 150,000 tons exported from the EU to the US in 2020. So just looking at the rest of the 2021 season. Increased home consumption, I think, is likely to remain as long as there are lockdowns, and we continue to see lockdowns and perhaps tighter lockdowns in Europe as the vaccine rolls out, as people try and keep the coronavirus under control. But there is that hope with the vaccines. Vaccines are now being administered throughout the EU and the UK, and that could mean quite sort of different in maybe only 2 or 3 months' time. There might be quite a difference. So we could see restaurants really sort of reopening, and not back to normal, but starting to get back to normal by March time, which would actually still give us 6 months before most of the 2021 potato crop arrives. So still time to sell more of that and use more of that. EU processing production is probably in 2020 was around about probably of potatoes for processing was probably down about 5% lower than it was in 2019. So there's less processing potatoes around and more retail packing, table potatoes, if you like. And I think there's stricter grading, so people are grading out more potatoes. The store losses, greater store losses. What's happened in the EU this year is the banning of CIPC, the anti-sprouting chemical, and people have been using alternatives, and there's an adjustment to how they use those alternatives and getting used to those. So we're probably seeing more losses in stores, and all that added together, we could see actually a tighter market in the summer than now. So there's a lot of potatoes around now, but they could be a bit tighter by then. A lot of potato organisations in some of the main potato growing countries have advised growers to plant 20% less potatoes in 2021 than they did in 2020. And if that does happen, we will see a significant reduction in production of potatoes across those 5 countries. And with average yields, we would see a small crop, even with average yields, we would see the smallest crop since 2012. And we could see, if there's below average yields, we could see a very, very small crop, which you could argue would actually leave Europe in great sort of deficit, which might mean then opportunities for more North American producers and processors. For the last few years, I've come to America at the Potato Business Summit and talked about Brexit. And it's always been, it's going to happen this year, or it will happen next year, or we're never quite sure when it's going to happen. But I can finally announce it has happened. It happened officially back in January, just after the last Expo and Summit. But in the last few months, there's been discussions on what the transition will be, or the new arrangements between the UK and EU will look like. And there was finally agreement on Christmas Eve, an early, well, not that early Christmas present for everyone was a new trade agreement was done between the two. That's now being ratified between the parliaments. And what it means from January the 1st, there's no tariffs or no non-tariffs on goods between the two, so the trading between the EU and UK. So that's avoiding a 14% tariff on frozen fries and a 10% on fresh potatoes. That's been avoided. There are new customs and phytosanitary checks between the two. Previous to that, because both were in a customs union and a single market, there were no extra checks on potatoes and potato products as they came through each country. But this is also a problem for UK seed exporters, that there are going to be restrictions. Well, there is a ban on export of seed potatoes. And the UK is around about a third of the UK's seed potatoes go to the EU. Egypt's the largest single market, and that has that trade continues as normal. But the EU, because of their concerns over sort of divergence of standards, that has been banned. And because of other complexities of the whole system, that actually means that English, Scottish and Welsh seed potatoes won't be allowed to be sold into Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom. But because it is borders the Republic of Ireland, which is still a member of the EU, that won't be allowed because of that sort of arrangement between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. I hope you're still keeping up on that. It is one of the sort of complexities that we're sort of discovering as we look at the trade deal in more detail. The UK is now negotiating, and it's free to negotiate its own trade deals with other countries. There has been a deal with Canada already agreed, which really replicates the same conditions that Canada has with the EU. And also, I think there's then going to be talks to go a bit further than that. And the UK has been talking with the US, and I think those talks will heat up, gear up after the new administration takes its place in January 20. And after that, there's going to be more negotiations. But food trade standards are very much sort of key issue between the two. So you can expect some sort of debate on that. There could be opportunities there for US and Canadian exporters to the UK. Frozen fry exports over the last year have only been in the hundreds of tons. So there might be an opportunity there, especially if there is a shortage of product from Europe in 21-22. So just really looking at some of the wider issues and lessons from the pandemic, I think one of the big things for me is that people have fallen in love with the potato or rekindled their potato passion. So it's time to make that most of that love. So I think it's time for us to act as potato cupids and to get people to fall in love with their potatoes even more. But as people have been growing or eating potatoes, cooking potatoes, they've sort of seen how great food they are, either in its fresh form or its processed form as well. More sales of oven frozen chips and things and fries at home, which is for us as an industry, we really got to look at that as being a positive. And I don't really need to tell you all these, but what's not to love? This, it covers just about everything: environmental, nutrition, best value. It can be used for other things. Can even be used to administer vaccines. Not going to be used for COVID-19 vaccines, but there's really, I don't think there's any food that gives as much as the potato. So really, a time for us to sort of focus. And I can understand why there are trade disputes and concerns between countries on trade, but I think really what we need to be focusing on is that real potential for people eating more potatoes all around the world, and rather than perhaps sort of fighting over one potato pie, we need to be increasing the size of the potato pie so there's more pie to share out for everyone. My simple lessons on trade disputes for you, because they can get very, very complicated. So one of the things that we've done in lockdown with potatoes was to start our own Planet Potato podcast. Don't expect the insight that you might get from the National Potato Council or others and the United Potato Growers of America. Don't expect that sort of insight on the market or whatever. But do expect celebration of the potato in all its wonderful forms, including a visit to a potato hotel. And that photo there is a potato having a post-lockdown haircut. That was the winner of the Potato Photographer of the Year. We had a visit to the museum that houses Mr. Potato Head, and also sort of stories about how potatoes brought people together during lockdown. So another celebration, and that's free to listen to on those links and also free to share. So please feel free to share. It's not just for potato industry people, it's for potato lovers, which we reckon is everyone in the world, or should be everyone in the world. So that's me. And so many thanks for your time and attention. And please do get in touch with us to give us a listen on Planet Potato, but also give us get in touch if you have any questions, and that's our details there. We do also do a Brexit newsletter on a monthly update on what happens with Brexit. So if you need to know a bit more about that, then please get in touch. So it just leaves me to wish you all well for 2021. 2020, most extraordinary year that perhaps most of us have experienced. But hopefully there is some better news on the horizon with 2021. And I really do think that it's time for us to celebrate the potato and really build on some of that love that people showed for the potato in 2020 and looking beyond that. And I think if you will be, hopefully things will be back to normal in 2022. And then in 2022, the plan is to have the World Potato Congress in Ireland then, and in May, June in Ireland. And I think you'll be most welcome to come over there, hopefully free of restrictions, so we can all celebrate and the potato and plan its future together. So many thanks, and as I say, I wish you a happy and successful but safe 2021.
And thank you, Cedric. It is always great information to hear what is happening in Europe. Next, we have a consumer and frozen potato overview by John Toastburn of Potatoes USA. John?
Hello, thank you for letting me speak to the UPGA Business Summit. Mark and the UPGA members, I really appreciate this. Such an important event, and I'm glad to be able to be part of it. I also want to give a special thanks, of course, to George for making all of this happen. None of us would be here if it wasn't for him. So today, I'm going to talk about the U.S. market, or the markets for U.S. potatoes. And I'm going to start with U.S. potato utilization. Potatoes USA just completed a study where we looked at both sales and utilization in marketing year 2020, which is, of course, starting in July 2019 through June of 20. And the first piece of this was utilization. So what happened to the potatoes that were grown in the United States? So while we did this, we looked at sales to retail, food service, and we factored in exports, imports to get to the total utilization. And as you can see here, that the increase in retail sales was not enough to overcome the decline in food service, as well as a slight decline in exports. And then the imports also further impacted utilization of U.S. potatoes. When we look at what these potatoes went to, we see that frozen continues to be the number one area, or the number one product that U.S. potatoes are used for, followed by fresh at 25%, chips at a very close 23%, and then dehy at 8%. This year we saw a 2% increase in chip utilization, with 1 percentage point coming from frozen and 1 from fresh. On the sales side, which is in reality much more important, what did happen with sales? So the interesting thing here, of course, is that over the last few years, we've been talking about how the food service sector is becoming a more and more important aspect in the sale of U.S. potatoes in the U.S. Well, this year there was a bit of a correction there, a bit of a change back to retail. So food service went from 58% back down to 53%, while retail went from 42% up to 47%. We look specifically at frozen, we see that same correction, or that same change, where food service declined from 85 to 82, and retail went up from 15 to 18. On the fresh side, it's very interesting because we were at a situation where it was basically 50-50 between food service and retail, and now we're back to a situation where 41% food service and 59% retail. So a bigger swing back to retail for fresh. If we drill down into the retail sales, we see that all products except for ready-to-eat meals sold at the deli, or ready-to-eat products sold at delis, went up. You can see that we had very strong growth for dehy and frozen, as well as canned. But even chips at 5.5% growth, since it's the largest category at retail in terms of volume, that had a significant impact. And so total sales were up almost 9% for the market. Of course, food service was the opposite. Here we see a decline in sales of all products, with fresh having the highest decline at 19.3%. This decline really did have a big impact on our industry. We have all felt those impacts as that product didn't go into food service and has moved back into retail. All right, so I'm going to take a little change here because that was the utilization for last marketing year. Now I want to look at the specific market, starting with a quick look at the international market, because that is very important for many of our products, particularly for frozen. So if we look at what happened in the July-June marketing year, July 2019 through June 20, we see that there were some declines. The interesting thing, of course, is that all of these declines occurred in the last 4 months. We were having record exports up through February. And then because of the impacts of the pandemic, we saw these declines, but still only 4% overall, which is significant, but not too dramatic. If we take a look at this over the last 5 marketing years, we see that we're actually still at 0% change in essence. So we're basically back where we were in marketing year 16, which was the year right after the impacts of the West Coast port shutdown. So while we lost a bit, we're still not that far off of where we've been over the last 5 years. Okay, so what's happening this marketing year? Obviously, so far, all of this marketing year has been impacted by the COVID and by the restrictions from the pandemic. So we're off 15% for the July through October period. But if you drill down and look at month by month, you see that a lot of that loss was over the summer, and that here in September and now in October, we're not back to where we were, but we're much closer. So we're getting much better. The rate of decline is definitely dropping. If we look at the specific products, we see that frozen is the one that's had the biggest impact, off 21%, because that's so focused on food service. But again, the rate of decline is improving as many of our international markets start to recover. One of the biggest concerns I have for the coming year, or the biggest factors impacting the international market, is the unit value, or the price of product being exported from our competitors and from the US. And if you look in particular at the number for the EU, you can see that those are over $200 less per metric ton than the US product. That is a significant difference. It makes it that much more difficult for us to compete against them in our international market. And then if you look at the graph on the side here with the settling prices, these are the futures prices in Europe, because they do have a futures market for potatoes. If you look at that solid blue line there, that's 2021, and it's the lowest of all. So we're not seeing a correction in these low prices in Europe, certainly this year. And that is something that has me very concerned as we go into the year and the competition this is going to create. Another factor that concerns me in terms of our exports are the trade agreements, and are the fact that our competitors have continued to move forward with trade agreements, while we have not made nearly as much progress in this area. Most recently, there was this new China and Asia Pacific trade agreement. It's not a full free trade agreement, but it is a cooperation agreement, and it does start to lower tariffs. Production of frozen fries in China continues to expand. Just this week, we saw that McCain's is investing in a second plant there. So that is going to become a bigger and bigger factor as well in terms of China competing in some of these markets, along with the EU and, of course, Canada. But there's still a very positive aspect to the international marketplace. And it is a $73+ billion market just for processed products around the world. This is a huge opportunity. This opportunity is doing nothing but growing. So we really do have opportunities. We just need to be able to access them and take advantage of them. One of the other factors, though, that has me a little concerned for this coming year, and this goes back to those unit values, of course, as well, is supply. The EU, despite the pandemic, did still increase potato production. Part of that was weather. The acreage was about the same as the previous year, but they had much better weather this year. So they ended up a 4.5% increase in production, whereas both the US and Canada declined around 2% in both of those countries. So was there an overreaction in North America? Are we going to have enough supply? Obviously, that depends on recovery. That depends on demand both here and internationally, but it is an area that concerns me. So I kind of hate to do this, but I'm going to go out a little bit on a limb. These aren't too dramatic of prognostications about what's going to happen this coming year, but these are just some thoughts I have on the international marketplace and what could be happening. Certainly the pandemic restrictions are going to stay around for a while, though you do see in Asia significant improvement and relaxation. But the one area that's probably going to be the last to change is international travel. And that impacts the tourism in many of these markets. And that is really important in a lot of these markets. Thailand, Vietnam, other countries in Southeast Asia really rely on tourism, and a lot of the food service that we sell to rely on those tourists. So that demand aspect will take longer to recover. As I just talked about, the EU and increasingly Chinese competition is going to be fierce. We've got to recognize that we are competing with these countries, that we have got to be able to meet them in a lot of different ways. But I do think by this time next year, the demand will be completely where it was, or even more so than at the pre-pandemic levels. So I see really very much a recovery in demand. The question in my mind is the U.S. industry going to recommit to fully taking advantage of this, and are we going to have the supplies needed? Okay, so let's change gears again here and look at the domestic market. Obviously, there's been a lot that's happened since that last marketing year that ended in June that I was just talking about. So let's drill down into this period. First and foremost, and this is what I was talking about, food spending has shifted again. So food at home was declining, or more importantly, food away from home was continuing to increase since 2014, and it surpassed at-home eating. Well, just like everything else, consumption of food has now returned to the home. How long this is going to last is hard to say. Certainly people want to get back to restaurants, etc., but I don't think it's going to be an automatic shift either. So this is an important aspect for us to remember. So, impacts on the food service industry from the pandemic have just been incredible. Now, of course, 215 billion in sales lost from March through October is not just food. There's a lot that goes into food service sales, restaurant sales, beyond just the food. But that is a significant loss in sales to that sector. If we look at the other side, at grocery sales, they increased 100 million from March through November. So if you remember, I was talking about billions, now I'm talking about millions here. So it's not nearly the same level of significance. On the other hand, back to food service not being all food, there's so many other costs there. That's where you see that, food service runs about 40% is food costs. So if you take only 40% of that other number, they start to be a little bit closer to one another. So how have potatoes fared in all this? Well, certainly at retail, we've fared extremely well. Produce sales spiked in the spring, and potatoes were right there the leader. We are the pandemic powerhouse. And we've seen the largest increases, the largest volume of sales as a result of the impacts of the pandemic. This is, it's got to look for silver linings, and this is certainly one of them. Retail potato sales from March through the end of November. You can see excellent growth everywhere. And again, we all know that things spiked at the beginning back in the spring, but they've stayed well above 2019 levels since then. The only exception, and I mentioned this before, are the deli prepared sides. And a lot of that has to do with many of the delis have had to close for food safety or health safety reasons. But 19% growth, certainly led by fresh potatoes at 20%, frozen at 30%. A lot of good growth that is continuing as we move along here, not just back in the spring. Drilling down into what specifically has been happening with fresh, we see that russet sales have done very, very well. 24% in dollars, 18% in pounds. So significant increase in russet sales, also a significant increase in yellow. Pretty much everywhere across the board, we've seen nice increases in the sales of fresh retail potatoes, and a total of 18%, as we talked about before. When we now look at pack size, those have all done well also. So we see that all pack sizes have grown. There was a nice movement in 10 pounds. We know that initially a lot of product was moving in these larger bags. I'm sorry to say, Ross, that the 15 and 20 pound bags didn't quite take over like you'd hope, but excellent growth with all pack sizes, with, of course, the 5 pound bags still being the top way that potatoes are. So on the restaurant side, on the food service side, we've had 110,000 restaurants close in the U.S., or 17% of the national total. That's almost a quarter of all restaurants. And certainly this winter, we're going to see a lot more. I would not be surprised if this gets closer to 200,000 by the time everything is said and done, just as the winter impacts and the continuing problems. There's a lot of light at the end of the tunnel, but there are still restaurants that are going to close. So from the potatoes perspective, what's happened as a result of this to frozen potato sales? And this is frozen potato sales to the food service industry as calculated by Technomics. And you can see that we have lost 1.1 billion pounds in the period from January through to the end of September, or the first 3 quarters of the calendar year. But the thing that's really important here is you see the big spike of 33% in quarter 2, but then things have improved significantly over the summer in quarter 3. So we are in a better position and things are recovering. And that's an important factor, is that frozen fries are starting to get much better traction than that initial period. And that's because there really have been some bright spots in this overall situation. Food service as a whole has really suffered, but concepts like Wingstop, Domino's, Papa John's, so the wings, the pizza, they have recorded double-digit growth throughout this period because they were so well equipped for takeout and delivery options. And now we're starting to see the burger chain really recover quickly as well. McDonald's actually posted year-over-year growth in quarter 3. So they are seeing people return. They have managed to adjust, and this is helping with fries. And this is why potato sales are not down nearly as much as overall food service sales have declined. And then there is some really strong pent-up demand out there. This is a picture of the line to get into the new In-N-Out burger that just opened up here in Colorado. People waited in line over 12 hours during the middle of the night in Colorado. It's just insane. And that's partly for In-N-Out, but it just shows that people want to get out of the house, they want to get food service, and the potatoes and fries are well positioned in this pent-up demand. So, Americans still love potatoes. And these are the truths that we hold to be very, very important to us. We're still America's favorite vegetable. We're on 84% of all food service menus, and we're the #1 vegetable sold at retail in the U.S. So we're still in an excellent situation when it comes to potato love in the U.S. The demand does remain strong, but it's shifted. Shifted from food service to at home to retail. How long that shift takes or stays, when it starts to go back, is hard to say, but it will, but I don't think it's going to just automatically change. I think we're going to see remnants of this shift stay in place for quite some time. So all in all, while it's been a tumultuous year, we're still in a very good position, and we really are recovering both in our sales internationally as well as domestically, and we're doing a good job of adjusting, but we We need to continue to adjust, and we need to continue to adapt to this new market situation. That's all I have for today. Thanks again to UPGA for inviting me, and to Mark and George for making this happen.
Thank you, John. Informative presentation that helps us all better understand our current situation. We are now privileged to hear an outlook on farming technology by Jason Tucker of John Deere.
Well, hello, and thank you in advance for watching this short video. I sure wish I was presenting to you in person, but I'm very excited to at least share with you in a virtual format. My name is Jason Tucker, and I'm the Western Sales Region Manager for John Deere, where I've had the privilege of working with dealers and customers in the western half of the United States. I've been with John Deere for just over 23 years. I was actually fortunate enough to address the Potato Business Summit audience back in 2019 as well. And, you know, just as I started that presentation a couple of years ago, I'd like to first start by saying thank you. Thank you for everything you do to feed a growing and a hungry world. Now, notice the title of this slide. This is the theme of my presentation. And of course, at the core of that theme, surprise, surprise, is technology. And I'm confident when I say that I speak on behalf of the entire equipment and technology industry as a whole, and that not only do we want to enable you, the grower, to farm better, but our aim is to enable you to grow your crop more profitably. As an industry, and certainly as John Deere, we're moving well beyond simply larger, faster, wider machines. We're moving into smart, connected, digitally enabled machines that are focused on holistic integration into your operation. In other words, machines and technology that are not just assets on a balance sheet, but rather critical components of how you grow your crop, and perhaps more importantly, how you drive profitability into your operation. You know, we have a goal, and that goal is to make a good or a great farm even better. As mentioned, my career with John Deere dates back over a couple of decades to the mid-90s. And if you think back to the mid-90s, it was actually mind-blowing that a tractor could essentially steer itself down the rows, right? Auto track. And if you think about technology prior to that, it was simply how efficient a hydraulic hose could be routed in order to gain a few incremental horsepower. In other words, there was not much technology beyond sort of that incremental mechanical technology. You know, and historically, since the dawn of time, making a good farm or farm ground better was based on tribal knowledge, right? It was based on what a grower knew about making multiple passes across the same field, what a grower knew from their father or their grandfather about the particular soil or soil type, what a grower or an equipment operator knew about the mechanics of the machine, how deep the planter needed to be by kind of gut feel, how much fertilizer needed to be applied, or by looking at the soil, what type or depth of tillage pass was needed, et cetera, et cetera. It was about tribal knowledge. But today, and certainly into the future, making a good or a great farm even better is about precision agriculture and significantly smarter equipment. And ultimately, it's about data. You know, the words precision agriculture likely have a somewhat different meaning to each of you listening here today. But to me, the key word is obviously precision. And clearly the smartest sensor on the farm, some might argue this, but the smartest sensor on the farm today is still the human brain. You know, but that human brain can only do so much given the myriad of multiple and complex variables at play at every plant level, literally every square foot level, heck, every square inch level. And precision agriculture is just that. It brings together all that information, all those complex variables, and it makes sense of that information. It processes it into an insight, and it allows execution of that decision quicker and with more accuracy than even humanly possible, or than what you could think. Sounds like space age stuff, right? Well, it's not at all space age stuff. It's here today. And if you think about how quickly it's changed over the past 5 years, I can tell you the next 5 years are going to be absolutely mind blowing. The pace of change in this area is faster today than it's ever been. And by the way, it's also the slowest today that it'll ever be. So how do we get here, and where are we going? And if you think about what you see here on this continuum on the slide, it took many, many centuries of farming, really since the dawn of time, before steam power and belt-driven powered equipment came into play. So multiple centuries. And if you think about when steam power and belt-driven power came into play, that was well over a century ago from today. And then it took nearly 40 years, 4 decades to really get into good hydraulic power of scale, where machinery, the tractor, the implement, really made significant strides in capability and productivity. Then it was just a few short decades after that, think about the 60s and the 70s, where we witnessed the adoption of higher horsepower machines, certainly more capable machines, larger machines, and certainly for those John Deere fans out there, you'll remember the 60s and 70s as the 4010s and 4020 tractors, right? They were game-changing tractors, and certainly within a short period after that, right, 10, 15 years, we began to see improved hydraulics. We began to see significantly more horsepower. Just incredible technology within the drivetrain components of tractors. Yet most of the improvements and most of the advancements were still around the mechanical nature of the product. And now for the last few years, and when I say few years, literally primarily the last decade, but maybe even the last decade and a half, the mechanical improvements that's come really have been minimal. Right? Productivity has been coming in the form of sensors. It's been coming in the form of intelligent machines. And think about that. I mean, it took centuries to get to a steam power, multiple decades to get to the next level of productivity, and then maybe a single decade. And now it's taken years and sometimes months to just become more and increasingly more productive and more advancements in how we're driving technology in agriculture. And these advancements today, they're really data driven, they're digitally driven, they're not mechanically driven. And data from the machine and data to the machine is making more capable machines. And more into the future, that data from and to the machine is becoming autonomous. It's making all those complex decisions with all those complex variables, as I mentioned earlier. It's making them simple. And this digital world that we live in is alive and well in agriculture. And for some of us, it might seem scary. And is it scary? Maybe. But is it exciting? Definitely. And for sure, it's becoming more clear as time goes on. As you can see on my continuum here, that electrical power, electrification, which is really a clear mechanism for even more intense and more efficient precision, will take an increasingly larger portion of the spotlight from those incremental mechanical improvements. So electrification is certainly alive and well today and part of the future. But what does this whole digitalization of agriculture really mean? When we replace mechanical and kind of hydraulic drives with high power electrical drives, for example, our ability to drive value into your operation increases significantly. I mean, think about it. High power electric drives provide greater control, greater precision, and the ability to automate machine and system functions. Think back to my comment about the human brain, right? It's still the best sensor on the farm, but what if that human brain was able to focus a lot more on the insights from the operation and thinking through how to be better, as opposed to focusing on the individual machine or the individual job function, and managing all those variables? How much more profitable could your operation be if you could focus on the things that matter and the insights derived from how I'm producing my crop, instead of focused on how to operate a piece of machinery? I personally believe the possibilities here are endless. This integration of technology with the machine, it enables the overall system. It improves productivity, it increases traction, it reduces ballasting, it improves soil health. I could go on and on and on. All of those improvements, however, contribute to the bottom line. And it just isn't just about the integrated technology on the machine. I've already used this D word, data, a couple times. It's about the data and the information that comes off of the machine. Notice the picture on the far right side of the screen. This is an actual photo of a potato grower's yield map. This particular grower did a tillage demo this spring and noticed significant differences in their yields from one side of the field to the other. Then they correlated the tillage passes to the increased yield, actually utilizing YieldDoc data from the machine, YieldDoc for potatoes, taking multiple layers of data and multiple layers of information off the machine in multiple steps of the production from tillage to harvest, and then driving those insights and slight changes to drive higher yields. What does higher yields drive? Higher profitability, right? It's outcomes without digital tools and data from the machine and to the machine are very possible today. And if you think about where that's going in the future, it's only more impressive. Digitalization, it equals precision agriculture. They're kind of one and the same. And precision ag obviously equals higher yields, as in my example here. It may equal lower cost. It may equal both, and that equals more profit. Seems simple, right? So specifically, what does this mean to you, the potato grower, right? It means we're working to implement this data, this technology into all steps of the production system. You may be thinking, growing potatoes is just a step in getting the food on the table, right? And I'd argue it's the most important step, but it's a step. How does this technology and this data impact processing and distribution, which is core to the overall production of potatoes, for example? But and clearly I'm an equipment guy, so I'm going to get out over my skis here just a little bit. But think about this: having access to production data, sustainability efforts that you go through, and decisions that you made along the way. Those decisions made with data, how critical are those going to be in processing and distribution? And certainly the consumers that are buying the end product, they're becoming more and more demanding of not only kind of where their food come from, but maybe more importantly, how their food was grown, how it was produced. So think about that as a grower. My guess is you don't want to be writing that information down from memory or relying on your equipment operators to recall the activities that they undertook. You want it automatically documented, seamlessly translated in a digital format to the processing and distribution, and perhaps maybe even to the end consumer. Again, it seems scary, but it is a digital and connected world we live in, and there's no reason that we in agriculture, and when I say we the equipment manufacturers, we the input suppliers, we the growers, collectively all together, there's no reason that we can't be at the forefront of this digital world and this change. And I can confidently say that our goal in this digitalization space, this technology space, is not technology for technology's sake. Our goal it's actually quite simple, and I've said it a couple times. It's the theme of my presentation, and that is help growers farm better and be more profitable. Precision ag it's got to be relevant. It's got to help you, the grower. Some of you heard me say this a couple of years ago, and it's only relevant if it's your data on your farm, your information, so that you can make decisions based on your operation. Precision ag's also got to be intuitive, right? We at John Deere, we work really hard on this, and I know the industry is working really hard on making it intuitive. This technology's got to be integrated into the machine and connected to a cloud so that you can choose how you interact with the data, how you use that information and collect that information to execute on the decisions you make. Now, whether those decisions are around, making every seed count during planting, making every drop count during the growth of the crop, or capturing every spud that's harvested, it has to be intuitive, it has to be easy, and it has to be something that you can execute on. Growing crops, regardless of the crop, is complex. You all know that better than I do. And I certainly don't have to tell you that. So if we can collectively learn every time we make a pass across the field, use those learnings to make our operation, our machines, our decisions better, why in the world wouldn't we take advantage of that? Now, in my opinion, one of the things about this technology and the connectivity that we've created is just that these machines can be connected to the land, connected to the grower, connected to other machines, and perhaps very importantly, connected to your dealer for support. Machines break, things happen, and when the machines are connected, they're live. Your dealer can provide uptime support in a very seamless fashion by monitoring the machine performance, diagnosing the issues remotely and quickly, and via the connectivity. And this connectivity, it enables you to make not only the machines better, not just better from a standpoint of quality, but also smarter and more efficient. And again, if you tie all those together, it enables more profit to you through uptime and proactive services. So these connected machines are not revolutionary per se, but if you think about the technology that helps you farm better, plus the technology that enables our dealer organization to service the machines better, all of that leads to ultimately to higher profits in your operation. Now, what would a technology or an equipment presentation be without touching on automation or autonomy, autonomous machines? And so, certainly the industry has been talking about this for a while, and we're certainly moving as an industry in that direction. But to me, the key to autonomous vehicles is not just about a driverless machine or a driverless tractor. It's about a machine that can autonomously perform functions during a production step that are either redundant, complex, they're difficult to repeat from field to field or from year to year. That's what autonomy is really about. And here's a picture on the slide of a step towards autonomy. This is our machine sync solution in action in potato harvesting. And I'm guessing there's a few of you listening today that have experienced this solution. This is harvesting and unloading with machines that are synced up with little to no operator interaction. So think about the ability to avoid the mistakes, the ability to maintain the synchronization of the speed of the machines. It's all automated. And this is just a simple yet complex, but simple example of the autonomous nature by which this technology enables. And there's no doubt into the near future that we're going to see fully autonomous solutions. No doubt in my mind. But at the end of the day, fully autonomous solutions must still deliver what any precision ag solution's got to deliver, and that's a path to reducing inputs, a path to improving yields, a path to sustainability, or a combination of all of those. And again, if you think about all those, they lead to one thing, and that's more profitability in your operation. So if you think about the technology, as you think about the data, as you think about the information all coming together in a solution like Machine Sync that you see here, at the end of all of that, it is about driving profitability into your operation. And if the solution doesn't do that, you got to ask yourself, is it a solution at all, right? So I could talk about, as you can tell, I'm passionate. I could talk about this all day, but I'll land this plane here, and that is that we've collectively come a long way in agriculture, and the future is way more bright than the past. And mechanization is the foundation. Make no mistake, it's the foundation that all of us have built our businesses on. It's the foundation that we built our farm on, relative to being productive. But the time is now to really transform to digital farming through integrated technology and data utilization. And I've alluded to it a few times here in this short presentation, but technology and data they're just widgets. They're just gadgets if they don't ultimately deliver what you see here on this slide, all the things that help growers farm better and be more profitable. So I'll finish this short presentation where I started, and that is that I just want to say thank you for all that you do to support a growing and a hungry world. Thanks.
Okay, and now we will take a look at the fresh potato market overview. We start this by looking at the 2020 crop, which was harvested last fall, and we look at kind of a 10-year history of the supply and price market and the outlook coming up, and kind of see how that all fits together. So we always start this by taking a look at yellow potatoes. Yellow potatoes are one of the stars, so to speak, in the potato world in terms of growth right now. We've talked about this for a number of years actually now, and you can see the trend for the last 10 years since 2011. We're all the way up to 10.7 million is our current projection this year for yellow potato fresh shipments. Now you can see there was a little bobble last year in terms of a downturn below the 9.8 million of 2018. So that 10.7 is somewhat of a return to that former trend. And we'll talk about this a little bit in a minute, but is that trend going to continue? How does last year have an impact on it as it was down a little bit? But we're certainly seeing the demand situation in very good stead. So that 9.5 million from last year, there was a few reasons for that. The Red River Valley, which grows almost all red and yellow potatoes, they had a disastrous harvest. And while that affected the red situation much more heavily, it also had a little bit of an impact on yellows. Idaho was also down a little bit in their yellow production last year, so that drove some of this drop down to that 9.5. But again, as I said, you can see that trend pick up kind of where it left off. We're back up to that 10.7 million hundredweight projected for yellow shipments this crop year. This is the tracker. Those of you that have seen this before know that the background, the kind of light rose-colored background, is the 3-year average. The dotted line is last year's numbers, and the heavy red line, of course, is this year's numbers. This is to date. We're through the latter part of December with this look, and you can see a very balanced supply situation. We're up almost 10% versus last year. That's to date, and we're also up almost 6% above the 3-year average. You can see how those trends kind of move along for a period here from early October to the Thanksgiving timeframe. We were well above the shipping pace of the 3-year average as well as last year. It's now come to a more traditional type of level over the last few weeks. But again, we're moving this crop very nicely. Demand is brisk, and the crop supply is in a very balanced type of situation for positive grower return. So let's take a look at that kind of summary of this yellow potato situation. The average 10-year growth rate is 8%. Those of you that remember the last few years, we've talked about that 10-year growth rate being closer to 9 or 10%. With that little downturn last year, it's now stands at 8%, but still a very positive situation in the yellow potato sector. The growth rate versus last year is 12.6%, again, from somewhat of a nudge down number from the previous year, but 10.7 million versus 9.5 in the 2019 crop. And with this demand increase that we're seeing, this positive demand environment, the 10 5-pound bale price, if you use that as a proxy for return, right now it is up into that $16 to $18 range per hundredweight. Very, very positive return for yellow growers. We've talked about this in the past as well, that no single geographic region really dominates the yellow market. The large players are California, mostly Kern County, Idaho, and the San Luis Valley. But again, unlike the red market and the russet market, there's no really dominant player as Idaho is to russets and the Red River Valley is to the red potato market. And with this 1-year growth pause, we kind of have asked this question too in the past. Are we nearing that plateau that we've discussed in the yellow market, where it's nearing that supply and demand equilibrium? With what we're seeing this year, we believe that perhaps we're not there yet, but it always is something that we want to keep our eye on and have discussions about and strategically look at. So now let's shift gears and talk about red potatoes. Red potato 10-year supply trend, fresh supply trend to the U.S. for the 2020 crop, we're projecting at just a shade below 12.5 million hundredweight. That's up a bit from last year, but you can see that trend line over the last 5 or 6 years is in a somewhat of a downward direction. If you go back the 10 years, we kind of go up that hump in the mid-teens back in 13, 14, and 15, where it kind of peaked out and then started a little bit of a slow drop. Now, last year, you'll all remember, was an extremely difficult year for the Red River Valley. Their harvest conditions were incredibly challenging, and probably 35, maybe even 40% of that fresh crop did not get harvested. So that was one of the big drivers in that drop to the 12 million that you see last year. But there is, again, that rebound up to the 12.5, let's call it, that you see there on this chart. And let's look at the trends for the shipping pace so far year to date. You can see that versus last year, which was that down year for supply, we're up almost 8% year to date. We are behind the 3-year average by about 7%. But you can see, again, that shipping pace moving along very nicely. And again, looking similar to yellows, at a very balanced and positive situation going forward. Let's talk about a little bit about the kind of the roundup on the red supply situation. That average 10-year growth rate is actually turned slightly negative, not quite 1%, but negative 0.9%. That had been around 0 last year. And in previous years, it had been slightly positive. So with those 2 years now that have been well below the previous years, that has turned slightly negative. The major shifts that are driving this year, the 500,000 or so hundredweight increase, the Red River Valley is up 5%. Some might think that may be more after the disaster they had last year, but they also had some challenges at the end of this year's harvest. And it was exactly the inverse of what happened to them a year ago. A year ago, they had way too dry of conditions, and this year's harvest, a year ago, they had way too wet of conditions, and this year's harvest, they had actually too dry of conditions. A lot of their fresh production acreage is not irrigated. It's on dry land, and so when it's too dry, you have a lot of challenges with bruising and too many dirt clods and that kind of thing. And so big challenge there. In fact, probably a couple thousand acres of that crop did not get harvested this year as well. Big Lake was up 30%, pretty big uptick there for the central Minnesota area. Colorado likewise, and Wisconsin up 18 and 20% respectively. The other big players in the red market, the other 4 major ones, Idaho, Florida, the Skagit Valley, and Texas, were actually by and large flat to last year's production. The other significant player in the U.S. market is what we import from Canada. And that looks like now we're projecting that'll be down about 20% from last year. Canada had some challenges in their fresh crop as well. And their overall fresh crop, we believe, is going to be down about 1 million hundredweight. And I think that's about 15%, down from about 6.5 million to 5.5 this year. But in the red sector specifically, it's projected to be down about 20% from last year. So what does that mean for pricing? Taking a look at that, we really see a stabilization in the red sector, that red price being more stable, i.e. less affected by supply shifts than ever before. And we really believe that the case that's happening there is that there's much higher utilization of the market information that's out there, the grower collaboration that is happening in the red sector, and all of those things we believe are leading to a more stable pricing situation and even supply situation going forward. The current pricing, again, using the 10 5-pound bale for a proxy, is in the $13 range, give or take. Red River Valley might be slightly below that, but their proxy size A tote price is in the $20 range right now. Let's move along and shift gears again. We'll talk about the russet potato sector next. And this is the 10-year trend for U.S. fresh russet potato shipments into the U.S. You can see, again, we're down to 68, let's call it 68.5 million for the 2020 crop. And that is down about 1.5 million hundredweight from last year's 70.1 million. 2 years ago, we actually dipped below the 70 million level, just barely below it at 69.8. But again, this year is down again pretty significantly. There's some some key drivers that happened with that. First and foremost, the acreage situation in the Columbia Basin was down, I think, almost 10,000 acres. And that's mostly processing, but it also affected the fresh acreage as well. And the same was true in Idaho. Idaho's acreage was down 13,000 acres. A lot of that was in the processing sector, of course, but some of it was in the fresh sector as well. And so that's some of the things that are driving this decrease here. And so again, all things being equal, we would look at this and say, we're going to look at a very balanced supply and demand situation. We'll talk about that more in a second when I look at the shipment versus price chart. But as we all know, things actually aren't all being equal this year with the situation with COVID-19 and the challenges that has presented to the potato market, not only in the fresh sector, but in the processing sector as well, and really all through the potato industry. And so we'll talk a little bit about the impact of that. But let's look at that chart. This one's a little busier than the red and the yellow charts, but I kind of wanted to follow not only the supply situation, but also the weighted GRI and how that correlates with the supply situation for last year and this year. The yellow dashed, heavy dashed line across the top is last year's weighted grower return index. That red dashed line is this year's weighted grower return index. And by weighted, I mean that's weighted by each area's volume. The four major russet shipping areas, Idaho, San Luis Valley, and Colorado, central Wisconsin, and the Columbia Basin. Those areas together probably ship well above 80% of the total russets into the market. So those are the weighted GRI areas that we're talking about, and they're weighted by the volume that each one ships. And the volume, speaking of the volume, those bars to the left are the blue bars. Those are actual for this year. The orange colored bars going forward past the end of December are our projections for volumes by week for going out for the remainder of this crop year. Again, just like the other charts, the dashed line across the top is last year's volume, the blue dash dotted line, and the light blue background is the 5-year average. So I think it's worthwhile to take just a little bit of a look at last year's a walk back in history. We all know a lot of the challenges that happened, but going into last year, it was a very positive situation. Started out, as it always does, with an increase in the GRI through the August period, but then as harvest starts to pick up, there's always that drop in pricing you see on that yellow line, all the way up until early October. And everybody remembers, especially in Idaho, what happened in early October. There was a very hard 3-day freeze that had a big impact on the remaining supplies that were left to be dug. And that dramatically altered the price situation going forward. And you can see it climbed to where it leveled off in that $12 to $13 range for a big chunk of the year, going forward all the way through the unofficial beginning of the pandemic in the middle of March. And what happened then, of course, is there was actually a little bit of a spike in not only the volume. You can see that spike in the blue dotted line. That's the volume spike that occurred, mostly driven by retail. But there was also a price spike at that time because of the retail increase in demand, and the food service situation had not yet taken hold, so to speak. The pipeline hadn't kind of been backed up as much as it did 3 or 4 weeks later. But then that came, of course, and that GRI started to drop along with the food service demand and the lockdowns that were happening. It did level off there around $9. But then it started to come back, as you can see, and that was driven by a few things. Actually, the processors, the frozen processors returned to the market and alleviated some potatoes that were hanging out there. The other thing that started was the USDA food box program, started in early to mid-May. That had a positive effect on moving some of those food service or previously destined food service potatoes. And the price did come back some. And by the end of July, it was back in that $13 range where it started this current crop year that we're in. So again, you can see it started off strong. As it always does, it dropped through that harvest window. But since then, it has stayed in that more of a depressed range, certainly well below last year. And Idaho, of course, is the bigger driver in that because of its weighting of volume shipped. And Idaho is also much heavier weighted to the food service sector versus retail than, say, a place like Colorado or Wisconsin. The Columbia Basin kind of has the same situation with their size profile, where it's more tilted to the food service side of things. But that food service decimation is the key driver going on with this price situation as we look at it right now up to the tail end of December, where it remains down in that $7 to $8 range on a weighted average. Again, because of Idaho's size, that's driven by the food service market there. But Colorado and Wisconsin, actually, it's more positive because of their heavier weighting towards the retail sector, which we've seen is probably up in that 9, 10, 11% range after that initial spike back in the springtime. All right, let's shift to talking about the volume and the price correlation. We kind of look at this every year. It's kind of fun to take a look and see what that correlation is, as we talked about the inelasticity of the potato market, whereas small changes in supply can enact significantly larger changes in the pricing or the return to the growers. So the average 5-year russet supply that we looked at in that chart at the beginning of this section, 71.5 million hundredweight a year. The all region weighted GRI for that previous 5 years was $8.10. This year, again, going back to that 68.5 million hundredweight, and the average weighted GRI to date for the 2020 crop is $9.53. So we say, what is that supply price correlation? And that 4% drop, that's the drop from that 71 million down to that 68.5. That 4% lower supply gives an 18% greater return. And the example that I often show, a grower can earn more harvesting those 96 acres at $9.53 than he would harvesting 100 acres at $8.10. Last year, if you recall, the situation was, or the projection at the time, that obviously changed subsequent to that because of what happened in the processing arena and with COVID-19 and the demand challenges. But last year at this time, the projection of a 10% lower supply to date at that point in the year gave a 63% greater return. So we've always kind of talked about that correlation being in that 5, 6, or 7 times range on the inelasticity of the market. So that 10% to 63% last year, that's about 6 to 1. This year, it's a little closer to 5 to 1. But again, historically, it's kind of traditionally been in that range both ways, by the way, that a small increase in supply would also have a more severe dampening effect on the return. With that, I'm going to finish up the slides and say thank you to everyone for your participation and joining us today. Again, you see our website portal there, and we will turn it back over to the main round here. Thank you very much. All right, thanks to all for attending this Potato Business Summit, and a very heartfelt thank you to all the presenters for sharing invaluable information with the industry. If you do have specific questions for any of the presenters and their presentations, feel free to send an email to George Martin at UPGA, and he will get the right person for a response. Again, we extend our sincere thanks to AMVAC, Vive, John Deere, and the JR Simplot Company for their support. All of these presentations will be available shortly at potatobusinesssummit.com. Thank you again very much, and enjoy the Potato Expo.